"Don't worry, she buys all my lies." My husband chuckled to his friends. He didn't know I'd picked up the extension. I sat in silence that night, and by morning I had a plan. He never saw it coming. I've never been the type of woman who eavesdrops on phone conversations, but that evening, when I went to the phone in the kitchen to call my mother, I accidentally pressed the wrong button and picked up the receiver of the parallel phone in the bedroom. David's voice came through clearly, like a hammer striking glass. "Don't worry, she falls for all my lies," he chuckled. "Roxa is so trusting that you can tell her any nonsense and she'll believe it. Yesterday I said I was working late until 10, but I was at Tina's until midnight. She didn't even suspect anything." His friend's laughter seemed deafening to me. Someone, I think it was Jake, added, "You said she controls the family finances. How can she not notice that the money is running out? I tell her that prices have gone up or that I had to pay extra for something at work. She always finds excuses for me. Even when I buy Tina gifts, I say they're corporate expenses. Roxy is such a sweet fool." "Man, you're cruel," laughed another voice. "No, just practical. I have stability at home and satisfaction on the side. What more could I want? Roxy cooks, cleans, earns money, and doesn't ask unnecessary questions. And Tina gives me what I'm missing in my marriage." I stood in the kitchen, clutching the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding in my throat and my ears were ringing with silence after I finally hung up. David was still talking in the bedroom, unaware that his little secret had been revealed. 5 years of marriage. For 5 years I had been building our life together, believing his every word, finding explanations for his strange behavior. When he started staying late at work, I thought he was trying to get a promotion. When he started hiding his phone, I decided he was just being more careful with his work affairs. When he lost interest in our shared activities, I attributed it to fatigue. I remembered how we met. I was 25, had just moved to the city after college, and was working at a small accounting firm. David seemed so confident, so grown up. He was a manager at a large company, wore suits, and talked about important projects. When he asked me out, I felt chosen. The first few months were magical. David took me to restaurants, bought me flowers, told me how special I was to him. He said he wanted a woman who would support him, who would create a cozy home while he built his career. I dreamed of becoming that woman. When he proposed a year after we met, I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was small but lovely. We didn't have much money for a lavish celebration, so we limited ourselves to a modest ceremony at the town hall and dinner at a restaurant with our closest friends and relatives. David said that the most important thing was our love, not luxury. I was happy to have found a husband with such the right priorities. But gradually something changed. Or maybe nothing changed. I just didn't notice the truth right away. David began to spend less time at home and criticize my spending, my clothes, my job more. When I tried to talk to him about our plans, he dismissed me. "Not now, Roxy, I have important things to do." When I suggested we go somewhere together, he said we couldn't afford it, even though I knew our budget allowed for it. I started making excuses for him. When my mom asked why David never came to family dinners, I said he was very busy. When my friends wondered why we never traveled, I explained that we were saving money for a house. When neighbors asked why he came home so late, I proudly replied that my husband was a very responsible worker. My friend Kate hinted several times that something was wrong. "Roxa, you're always alone at events. Where's your husband?" she asked. But I always found an explanation: work, fatigue, important projects. Kate shrugged and didn't insist, but I saw doubt in her eyes. I began to live his life, not noticing that I had almost nothing of my own left. I worked in the morning, cooked in the evening, cleaned, did laundry. On weekends, I went shopping, paid bills, visited relatives, always alone, because David had important things to do. I was proud that he could rely on me for everything. My days became predictable down to the smallest detail. I got up at 7, made breakfast for David, worked until 5, went shopping at the supermarket, cooked dinner, cleaned, watched TV until 10. David came home late, ate a reheated dinner, watched the news in silence, and went to bed. Sometimes we talked about everyday things, bills, repairs, shopping. We hadn't talked about feelings in a long time. Meanwhile, he laughed at me with his friends. That night, I lay next to him in bed and stared at the ceiling. David slept peacefully, snoring from time to time. I thought about all his late meetings, the mysterious phone calls he took in the other room, how often he had been taking showers as soon as he came home lately, about Tina, whose name he never mentioned in front of me. I remembered how a few months ago I found a receipt from an expensive restaurant for 2 in his jeans. When I asked him about it, he said it was a business meeting with an important client. I had to impress him to get the contract, he explained at the time. I was even proud that my husband was working so hard for our future. Now I understood. It was a romantic evening with Tina. And then there was that silver necklace I accidentally saw in his briefcase a month ago. When I asked him about it, David replied that it was a birthday gift for their department secretary. Corporate courtesy. You know how important it is to maintain good relationships with colleagues, he said, and I agreed. I even thought how thoughtful he was. Now I understood who the necklace was for, and which restaurant he had been to with that same Tina while I was sitting at home waiting for him to come back, cooking dinner, which he ate in silence, and those new boxer shorts I found in the washing machine. Expensive, sexy, not my style at all. When I asked where they came from, David was surprised. They're yours, Roxy. Did you forget you bought them? I knew I hadn't bought them, but he was so confident that I began to doubt myself. Maybe I really did forget. Maybe I bought them on impulse and forgot. Now I understood. They belonged to Tina and accidentally ended up in our laundry after their dates. How many other things were there that I hadn't noticed or misunderstood? When the alarm went off at 7 in the morning, I got up and went to make him breakfast, as I had done every morning for 5 years. My hands were shaking as I cracked the eggs for the omelet. David appeared in the kitchen in a shirt and tie, neatly ironed as always. "Good morning, dear," I said, placing a plate in front of him. "Morning," he muttered, without looking up from his phone. I sat across from him with a cup of coffee and watched him eat. The same man I had loved for 5 years. The same chestnut hair, the same scar on his chin from a childhood injury he told me about on our second date. The same hands that once touched my face so tenderly and now touched Tina's. "I might be late today," he said without looking up from the screen. "Important meeting with a new client." "Sure," I replied. "What's his name?" David looked up at me with slight surprise. "Who?" "The client." "Just curious." He paused for a second, then replied, "Anderson?" "James Anderson. He's considering a big contract with us." I nodded and smiled. "Sounds promising." "I hope everything goes well." "Yes, me too." He looked back at his phone. "I have to go." David stood up, kissed me on the temple, and walked to the hallway. I heard him put on his jacket and grab his keys. The door slammed and I was left alone. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at his half-eaten omelet. For the first time in 5 years of marriage, I knew for sure that my husband was cheating on me. And for the first time in 5 years, it didn't upset me. On the contrary, I felt something like relief. Finally, I knew the truth. Now all that remained was to decide what to do with it. That morning, when David left for work, for the first time in 5 years, I didn't immediately get ready for the office. Instead, I called my boss and said I was sick. I did have a headache, so it wasn't a complete lie. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked at the walls of our apartment. Everything was so familiar. The beige walls I had painted myself 3 years ago, the photos from our honeymoon on the dresser, the plants on the windowsill that I watered every morning. But something had changed. Maybe I had changed. I went to our bedroom and opened David's drawer in the dresser. My hands were shaking. I had never looked through his things before. It seemed like a breach of trust, unworthy behavior. But yesterday's conversation changed the rules of the game. Among the briefcases, ties, and documents, I found something I didn't expect. A stack of bills from a credit card I didn't know about. The expenses were staggering. Expensive restaurants, Le Bernardin, Gramercy Tavern, places I dreamed of but we never went to. Jewelry stores, Tiffany's, Cartier, amounts that would have made me gasp. Hotels, the Plaza, the Ritz-Carlton, rooms for the night when he said he was working late. For an amount that was 3 times what we usually spent in a month. The oldest bill was dated June of last year, so it had been going on for over a year. I remembered how last summer David suddenly became less careful with money. When I asked about our savings, he said that everything was under control, that I shouldn't worry about finances. "I'm a man, I have to worry about that," he said. "You do so much for our family." Trust me on this, and I trusted him. Like a fool, I photographed every bill with my phone. My hand no longer trembled. On the contrary, I felt a cold concentration I had never known before. It was like working with financial reports at the office. Methodical, attentive, emotionless. The next find was a cell phone, an old iPhone that I hadn't seen in his hands for months. It was lying in the back of a drawer under a pile of old documents and warranty cards. The phone was turned off. But when I turned it on, I saw dozens of messages from Tina. "I miss you," written at midnight when he was lying next to me. "When will we finally be together?" Sent in the morning while I was making him breakfast. "I can't wait for tonight." And that day, he told me he had an important meeting with clients, and the most painful ones, photos of Tina in lingerie that I saw in our laundry room. A red lace bodysuit that I found 3 months ago and about which he said, "It's yours, dear, you just forgot." I felt so stupid then that I couldn't remember buying it. Tina in a necklace that I found in his briefcase. The same pearls he gave to a colleague for her birthday. Tina in a hotel room that he paid for with our joint money. She was lying on a bed with white sheets, smiling at the camera, and there were 2 bottles of champagne on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked through the messages one by one. The dates coincided with his delays at work. The photos were taken on days when he said he was going on a business trip. When I was supposedly asleep, he wrote to her, "I can't sleep without you." When I was making him lunch before another important meeting, he sent her a photo of our kitchen with the caption, "I'll be free soon and fly to you." Our entire last year together was one big lie. Then I did something that years ago would have seemed impossible to me. I went to his social media page. David never added me as a friend, saying he wanted to keep his personal life private. "Social media is the cancer of modern society," he said. "Why flaunt our happiness?" Now I understood why. His profile was full of photos with Tina. True, my face was not in them. Usually they were photos of food in restaurants, landscapes from their travels, his hand holding a woman's, but without a face in the frame. The captions were ambiguous. "A wonderful evening. Life is beautiful. With those who really understand, I finally feel alive." The comments under these photos were heartbreaking. His friends clearly knew about Tina. "When are you going to introduce us to the mysterious stranger? She's really changed you. You're finally happy. Time to get rid of the dead weight at home, man." And I sat at home waiting for him to come back, cooking dinner and believing his lies about work. Jake, his best friend, wrote a month ago. "When are you going to break up with her? Tina is worth the risk." David replied, "It's comfortable for now." Everything is stable at home, and with Tina, there's passion. Why change anything? I realized that I had to act methodically. Emotions would only get in the way. I took a notebook, the same one I used to record our family expenses, and began to write down everything I found: dates, amounts, names of places. Gradually, a picture of my husband's double life emerged. The next step was to examine our joint finances. I always had access to our main account, but now I took a closer look at all the transactions over the past year. Regular cash withdrawals in large amounts, thousands of dollars every week, transfers to unfamiliar accounts. I guess to her account. Payments for services I didn't know about, spas, beauty salons, personal trainers, all for her. The biggest shock came when I called the bank and found out that David had taken out a loan secured by our apartment 3 months ago, a loan for $50,000 that I didn't even know about. When I asked if I could get the loan documents, I was told that I was not a co-borrower and was not entitled to this information. But it's our shared apartment, I said. That may be so, ma'am, but the loan agreement is only in Mr. Ridge's name. You'll have to contact him directly. My heart was beating so hard that I could barely speak. Our apartment, which we had bought together and for which I had paid half the down payment, was now in jeopardy, and I didn't even know about it. I imagined the bailiffs coming and putting me out on the street while David and Tina were having fun in some hotel. I realized I had to call his work. Maybe one of his colleagues knew something. I dialed his office number and asked to be connected to David Ridge. "I'm sorry," said the secretary, "but Mr. Ridge no longer works for our company. He was fired back in January 3 months ago. Every morning he would get dressed, grab his briefcase, and go to a job that didn't exist. Every evening he would come home and talk about his day at work, his colleagues, his projects. It was all a lie." "Could you tell me why he was fired?" I asked, trying to sound calm. The secretary paused, then replied, "I'm sorry, but that's confidential information. All I can say is that it's related to a violation of corporate policy." I thanked her and hung up. Violation of corporate policy. Perhaps romantic relationships with colleagues were prohibited, or he stole something, or he used corporate funds for personal needs. There were many possibilities, and none of them were comforting. I realized that I needed professional help. I found the number of a private investigator, Marcus Stone, on the internet. According to his resume, he specialized in cases of marital infidelity and had experience working in the police force. The cost of his services was considerable, but I needed irrefutable evidence. "Ms. Ridge," he said when I called, "I understand how painful this is for you. But if you really want to know the truth, you'd better be prepared for it to be even worse than you think." "I'm ready," I replied. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was telling the truth. When I heard the sound of keys in the lock at 4 p.m, I quickly put everything back in its place and sat down on the sofa with a magazine. David entered the living room looking like a tired worker. He was wearing the same suit he had left in the morning, but his tie was untied and there was a faint lipstick stain on his shirt. "Hi, honey," I said. "How was your day?" "Tough," he said, sitting down next to me and rubbing his temples. "This new project is taking all my energy. How are you? Are you feeling better?" I looked at him and thought about how much energy it must take to come up with such detailed stories every day. He really was a talented actor. "Yes, thank you. Just a little overtired," I replied. "What kind of project is it?" "You haven't told me." David hesitated for a second, then began to talk about some complicated deal with Japanese partners. The details were quite plausible. He always knew how to lie convincingly. He named fictional Japanese businessmen, talked about the cultural peculiarities of negotiations, complained about time zones and the need to get up early for calls. I listened and nodded, but one thought kept running through my head. How long did he plan to continue this game? In the evening, while David was taking a shower, for the second time that day, by the way, I quickly looked through his phone. There were no new messages from Tina, but I saw a note in his calendar for tomorrow. Tina, lunch, Marriott Hotel. So tomorrow he would again lie about work and go to a hotel with his mistress. Over dinner, he told me about his fictional colleagues, new office intrigues, and how difficult it was to work with the new project manager. He even came up with a name for him, Richard Anderson, and described his character in detail. I smiled, asked questions, played the role of an interested wife, but inside, something froze inside me. "What does this Richard look like?" I asked. "Tall, thin, wears glasses." "Very pedantic," David replied without hesitation. "Sounds like a difficult guy. Where did he work before? In Chicago, at General Electric. He has extensive experience in international trade. The details came pouring out one after another. David was so skilled at lying that it came naturally to him. I thought, maybe he had always been like this, but I just hadn't noticed. When we went to bed, David kissed me goodnight as usual and fell asleep quickly. And I lay in the dark and planned my next steps. I needed evidence, photos, documents, testimony. If it came to divorce, I wanted to be ready. I thought about how quickly people can change. Just yesterday, I was a trusting wife who believed every word her husband said. And today, I'm lying next to him, spinning a web like a spider that has caught a fly. Maybe David was right when he told his friends that I was naive, but he didn't know one thing. Naivety can be cured. And when that happens, the result is unpredictable. I fell asleep thinking that tomorrow I would take action and that he would never see it. The next morning, I told David over breakfast, "Honey, I signed up for a floristry course." He looked up from his phone and looked at me in surprise. Floristry? Why? I've always dreamed of learning how to arrange beautiful bouquets. I smiled so naturally that I surprised myself. And I want to try something new in general. Maybe even start my own business someday. "How much does it cost?" he asked immediately. $300 for the course, but it's an investment in the future. I saw him trying to calculate whether it would affect his and Tina's expenses. "Well, if it makes you happy." He looked at his phone again. "When do you start?" "Today after work. Classes are 3 times a week, 2 hours each. That would give me 6 hours a week for my own things." David nodded and went to get ready, while I stayed in the kitchen, looking at his half-eaten scrambled eggs and thinking how easily he believed me. Apparently, when you lie all the time, you don't suspect others of lying. My first stop after work was the office of Melissa Hartwell, a lawyer recommended to me by a friend. She was a woman of about 45 with short blonde hair and a cold stare that immediately made it clear that she was not to be trifled with. "Miss Ridge," she said when I told her my story, "you have several problems. First, you are not a co-owner of the loan, which complicates matters. Second, if your husband is truly unemployed, he can claim that he is unable to pay alimony. Third, you need irrefutable evidence of infidelity." "What kind of evidence?" "Photos, videos, eyewitness testimony, expense receipts. The more the better, and everything must be obtained legally." She gave me the detective's business card. "Marcus Stone is one of the best in town, expensive but professional." The next meeting was with Marcus himself. He turned out to be a man in his 50s, a former police officer with tired eyes and gentle manners. "Ms. Ridge, I've handled hundreds of cases like this," he said. "And I can tell you one thing. You'll be surprised at how much detail you can learn about a person's life in a few weeks." "What exactly will you be doing?" "Surveillance, photo and video recording, checking financial transactions, social networks, possibly interviewing acquaintances. The cost is $500 a day plus expenses. I calculated my savings, the ones David didn't know about. It would be enough for a week or 2 of detective work." "I agree," I said. "One more thing," Marcus added. "Be prepared for the truth to be more painful than you think. Often it's not just an affair, but a whole web of deception." On the way home, I thought about his words. What else is he hiding? Maybe Tina isn't the only one? When I got back at 8, David was sitting at the computer in the hall. "How was class?" he asked without looking up from the screen. "Great. We learned the basics of composition. Tomorrow we're making a bouquet of roses," I said with such enthusiasm that I almost believed myself. "That's good," he muttered and returned to his computer. I moved closer and saw a chat with Tina on the screen. "I can't wait for tomorrow," she wrote. "Me too," he replied. "What kind of project is it?" I asked innocently. David quickly closed the window. "Work stuff, boring." The day after the floristry course, I met Marcus at a coffee shop near my house. "First results," he said, showing me his tablet with photos. Your husband met with Tina Johnson today at 3 p.m. at the Marriott Hotel. They stayed there for 3 hours. In the photo, David was kissing a woman near the hotel elevator. She was younger than me, with long dark hair and a model's figure. That's not all. Marcus showed me other photos. They went shopping together. He bought her a dress in a boutique for $1,500. I looked at the photos and felt a strange calm. No pain, no anger, just cold certainty. Continue surveillance, I said. That evening, David told me how he had spent the whole day in meetings with Japanese partners. They're so pedantic, he complained. They discuss every detail 50 times. Poor thing, I said sympathetically. Where were the meetings held? In the office. Where else? He replied without hesitation. I nodded and went to make dinner, but for the first time in many months, I cooked with a smile. I enjoyed catching him in his lies. A week later, I ran into a neighbor from the top floor in the stairwell. Robert King, 33, worked as an engineer for a construction company. We had greeted each other several times in the elevator, but never talked for long. "Hi, Roxy," he said when we found ourselves in the elevator together. "How are you?" He looked tired, with stubble on his face and dark circles under his eyes. "I'm fine. How are you?" "You don't look so good," I said. "I'm getting divorced," he smiled sadly. "It turns out my wife has been cheating on me for 1.5 years with my business partner." Something in his words resonated with me. "I'm so sorry," I said sincerely. "It's okay." Better late than never to find out the truth. He looked at me more closely. "How's your David?" "Haven't seen him in a while." "He's very busy with work," I replied automatically. "He's lucky," Robert said. "These days, a stable job is a rarity." When the elevator stopped on my floor, he suddenly asked, "Listen, would you like to grab a coffee sometime?" "Just to talk. I think we're both going through a difficult time right now." I looked at him and suddenly realized that this could be useful. If David can have his little secrets, why can't I? "Why not?" I said. "Tomorrow after work?" The next day, I told David again about the floristry classes and went to the coffee shop to meet Robert. He was already sitting at a table by the window, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Thanks for coming," he said. "To be honest, I just need someone to talk to." We talked for 2 hours. Robert told me about his divorce, about how long he had failed to notice the obvious, and I listened and thought, our stories are strangely similar. "What about you?" he finally asked. "Is everything okay at home?" I wanted to say, as always, "Everything's great," but instead I decided to take a chance. "Not really," I said. "I think my husband is cheating on me." Robert leaned toward me. "Do you want to talk about it?" And I told him everything. About the conversation I overheard, the evidence I found, the detective. He listened silently, nodding occasionally. "You know what?" he finally said. "I think you're stronger than me. I just fell apart when I found out the truth, but you're taking action." "I don't know if it's strength or just anger," I replied. "Maybe it's the same thing," he smiled. "The main thing is, don't let him make a fool of you." When I got home, David was sitting on the couch with his phone. "How are the classes?" he asked as usual. "Great," I said. "Today we made a bouquet of lilies. It turned out very nicely." I sat down next to him and rested my head on his shoulder. He flinched. We hadn't done that in a long time. "David," I said softly, "what if I really start a florist business?" "What do you think?" "I don't know," he said, still on the phone. "It's risky. You need a lot of money to start." "What if I find investors?" "What investors?" He looked at me. "I don't know. Maybe one of your colleagues would be interested." David tensed up. "You shouldn't mix work with your personal life," he said sharply. "Of course," I smiled, just thinking out loud. But I could see he was nervous. He was afraid I would start taking an interest in his work. The next day, Marcus showed me new photos of David and Tina in a restaurant in a park near her house. In all the pictures, they behaved like a couple in love. "There's something else," said the detective. "I checked her social media. It seems she doesn't know your husband is married either." He showed me her Instagram page, photos with David, captions, "With my love, my other half, the happiest woman in the world." "Does she think they're a couple?" I asked. "It looks that way. Maybe he's lying to her about the divorce or something." I looked at the photos and suddenly felt something new, not anger towards her, but almost pity. She was also a victim of his lies. That evening, while David was taking a shower, I took his phone. There were many new messages, all from Tina. "When are you finally going to get divorced?" "I'm tired of hiding," she wrote. "Soon, my dear." "It's a complicated process," he replied. "Does she suspect anything?" No, Roxanne is so naive. She would believe anything. I put the phone back and smiled. He still thought I was a naive fool. But tomorrow, the detective would give me the complete file on him and Tina, and in a week, I would meet with a lawyer for the final planning. When David came out of the shower, I walked up to him and hugged him. "I love you," I said. He looked at me in surprise. "I love you too," he replied automatically, but I could see only irritation in his eyes. I was distracting him from thinking about Tina. "David," I said, looking him in the eyes, "what if we go somewhere for the weekend?" "We haven't had a vacation together in a long time." "I can't," he said quickly. "Work." "On Saturday?" "Yes, an important presentation for the Japanese." I nodded and let him go. But I was thinking, on Saturday, Marcus will be photographing them at the country motel where they are going. I knew this from his calendar. When we went to bed, David quickly turned his back to me, and I lay there planning his downfall. Strangely, I liked it. For the first time in years, I felt smarter than him, stronger, more prepared. Maybe Robert was right. Anger and power really are the same thing. Or maybe I had finally become the woman I could have always been if I hadn't spent all my energy maintaining the illusion of a happy marriage. In any case, tomorrow a new game would begin, and this time I would set the rules. David's birthday was on Saturday, April 20th. We usually celebrated modestly, a small dinner at home or at a restaurant with a few friends. But this year, I decided to throw a real party. "Honey," I told him a week before his birthday, "I want to surprise you. A real party with all your friends." David looked at me in surprise. "Roxa, you know I don't like big parties." "But you're turning 35. It's an important date." I smiled as sincerely as I could. "Besides, you've been working so hard lately. You deserve to relax with your friends." "I don't know." He looked worried. "What if I have work to do?" "On Saturday?" "Come on. You can devote one day to yourself." I could see him thinking it over. On the one hand, he didn't want to take any risks. On the other hand, it would be strange to give up his own birthday. "Okay," he finally said, "but nothing too big." "Of course." "Just close friends." I spent the next few days making preparations. I called all his friends, Jake, Mike, Steve, their wives. Everyone promised to come. Then I found Tina's phone number on social media and called her. "Hello?" Her voice sounded young and cheerful. "Hi, Tina. This is Roxy, David's wife." Pause. Then, "Oh, hi. What's up?" "Nothing bad. I'm just throwing him a surprise birthday party and wanted to invite all his colleagues. David talks about you so much." "About me?" Her voice sounded surprised. "Yes, he says you're the best on the team. It would be great if you came. And bring your husband, of course." "My husband?" Now there was tension in her voice. "Well, David said you were married." "Or am I mistaken?" A long pause. "No, you're not mistaken," she finally said. "Okay, we'll come." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anticipation. In a week, it would all be over. Marcus gave me the complete file. Photos, videos, bank statements, copies of loan documents. Everything was neatly organized in a folder with labels and dates. "That's all you need," he said. "You have enough evidence for any court." Attorney Melissa looked through the materials and nodded with satisfaction. "This is one of the best cases I've ever seen." Your husband didn't leave himself any options. On the morning of his birthday, I got up early and started cooking. David was still asleep. He'd been on the phone in the bathroom until midnight, probably talking to Tina. I cooked his favorite dishes: lasagna, chocolate cake, Caesar salad. Everything had to be perfect. "What a wonderful way to wake up," he said when he woke up and saw the table set. "Thank you, dear." He kissed me on the temple, and I felt disgust, but I smiled. "Happy birthday, David. I hope you'll remember this day forever." "I'm sure I will." He smiled and sat down to eat breakfast. The day passed quietly. David tried to go somewhere. He said something about the gym, about meeting Jake, but I found reasons to keep him at home. "Help me clean up. We need to go buy wine. I want you to be here on your birthday." He was annoyed, but he couldn't argue. At 6 p.m, the guests began to arrive. Jake and his wife, Emily, Mike and his new girlfriend, Steve and Carol. Everyone was in a good mood with gifts and smiles. "Where's the guest of honor?" Jake shouted. "Here he is." I hugged David around the shoulders. "My dear husband." David looked a little tense, but quickly relaxed in the company of his friends. They talked, laughed, and drank beer, just like in the good old days. At 7, Tina arrived. She came with her husband, a tall, thin man in his 40s with red hair. David almost choked on his beer when he saw them at the door. "Oh, here are David's colleagues," I said cheerfully. Come in, come in." "Roxa, this is Tina," David said in a hoarse voice. "And this is Dan." Tina's husband introduced himself. "It's very nice to finally meet David's wife. Tina talks about you so much." I saw David and Tina exchange a quick glance. She looked worried. He looked panicked. "I've heard a lot about you, too," I said to Tina. "David always praises his best employees." The party went on. The guests talked, ate, and had fun. Tina and Dan kept a little apart. They clearly didn't know the other guests. David kept coming up to Tina and whispering something to her. She nodded, but looked increasingly uncomfortable. At 9 o'clock, when everyone had had a few drinks and relaxed, I tapped my spoon on my glass. "Friends, attention. I want to make a toast to my dear husband." Everyone fell silent and turned to me. David smiled, but I could see the tension in his eyes. "David," I began, "we've been together for 5 years. And all this time, you've amazed me with your ingenuity, creativity, and ability to tell incredible stories." Several people laughed. David nodded, clearly not understanding where I was going with this. "But what amazes me most is how you manage to balance the different aspects of your life: work, home, friends." I looked at Tina. "Colleagues. You are a true master of balance." Tina blushed. Dan looked at her in surprise. "That's why I decided to give you a special gift." I went to the dresser and took out the prepared folder, a photo album of your life over the past year. I opened the folder and took out the first photo, David and Tina in front of the Marriott Hotel. "Here you are at an important business meeting," I said loudly. David turned pale. Tina clutched her heart. Dan came closer to look at the photo. "And here you are discussing the terms of the contract over a romantic dinner." I showed the next photo. The room fell silent. Jake put down his glass. Emily opened her mouth. Everyone looked at the photo, then at David. "Roxa," David whispered, "I can explain." "Of course you can," I smiled. "You can always explain. Like that receipt from the restaurant, or that necklace in your briefcase, or the $50,000 loan secured by our apartment." "A loan?" Jake asked. "Yes, he took out a loan 3 months ago. He just forgot to tell me." Dan took the photo from me and looked at it closely. "Tina," he said quietly, "what does this mean?" Tina started crying. David rushed over to me. "Roxa, stop it. It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I stepped away from him. "Maybe you'll tell everyone how you called me a sweet idiot in front of your friends, or how you bragged that I fall for all your lies." Jake lowered his head. Mike scratched the back of his head. Steve looked at Carol. Or tell them that you were fired from your job back in January and I still don't know about it." "You were fired?" Mike asked in surprise. David looked at me with hatred. "You're crazy," he hissed. "Maybe I took a few more photos, but I'm not blind." Unlike Tina, I turned to her. "Tina, did you know he was married? Did he lie to you about the divorce too?" She cried even harder. Dan put his arm around her shoulder. "Answer me," he said harshly. He said he was getting divorced," Tina whispered. "That he was only living with you for appearances. That it would all be over soon." Dan turned sharply to David. "Did you promise to marry her?" David was silent. The room was so quiet that all you could hear was Tina crying. "And with my money," I added. "Everything he spent on you came from our joint account." Dan clenched his fists. "Bastards," he said, and punched David in the jaw. David fell to the floor. The guests gasped. Emily covered her face with her hands. "Dan, stop it!" Tina shouted. "You're beautiful too," her husband turned to her. "You slept with a married man for a year and a half and thought it was okay?" "I didn't know." "You didn't know? You never wondered why he couldn't come home? Why all the meetings in hotels? Why you never saw his apartment?" Tina cried without answering. David got up from the floor, rubbing his jaw. "Everyone go home," he said. "The party's over." "For you, yes." I approached him. "Tomorrow morning you'll pack your things and leave. The lawyer has already prepared all the documents. This is my home too. It was yours until you mortgaged it without my knowledge. Now it's mine until the court decides otherwise." The guests began to gather their things. No one knew what to say. Jake came up to me. "Roxa, I'm sorry. We didn't know he was treating you like that." "You didn't know?" I looked at him. Who was laughing when he told us how naive I was? Who encouraged him to divorce me for Tina? Jake looked embarrassed. "It was just, we thought—" "You thought it was fun to watch him cheat on me?" He didn't answer and walked away. When everyone left, only David and I remained in the apartment. He sat on the sofa, holding his jaw. "You ruined everything," he said. "Me?" I laughed. "You ruined everything. I just showed the truth. Tina will never forgive me now." "Did you expect her to forgive you?" "After she finds out you've been cheating on her for a year and a half?" He looked at me with such hatred that I involuntarily stepped back. "You did it out of revenge." "Of course. And how?" "Do you feel better now?" I fell silent. Indeed, how? I stood in the middle of the devastated living room, looking at the man I once loved, and suddenly realized that I didn't feel better. Not at all. The revenge I had so desired turned out to be empty. Yes, David was humiliated. Yes, his deception was exposed, but I didn't feel triumphant. Only fatigue and a bitter taste in my mouth. "Get out of here," I said quietly, with pleasure. He went to the bedroom to pack his things, and I sat in the kitchen among the remains of the cake and thought, what did I expect? That it would be easier? That the pain would go away? The pain didn't go away, it just changed. Instead of the pain of betrayal, there was the pain of emptiness. Instead of illusions, there was cold reality. When David left, taking 2 suitcases and throwing his keys on the table, I was left alone in an apartment that suddenly seemed foreign to me. Everything was in its place, but everything had changed. I looked at the photos of our wedding on the shelf and thought, when did it all start? When did he stop loving me? Did he ever love me at all? Or maybe the question was different. When did I stop loving myself so much that I allowed him to treat me this way? I cleared the table and washed the dishes. I threw away the flowers David had given me a week before his birthday. Now I knew it was just a tradition, nothing more. Then I sat down on the sofa and cried. Not out of self-pity, not out of anger at him, from the realization that 5 years of my life had been spent in an illusion, and that revenge cannot bring back lost time. Night fell outside the window, and I sat in the dark and thought, what now? Who am I without him? Who am I without this role of a deceived wife? For the first time in many years, I had to find the answer to this question on my own. The year passed faster than I expected. When I look back, it seems both long and short. Long because of the pain and changes, short because of the number of things I had to go through. The first months after that birthday were difficult. The divorce dragged on for 5 months. David tried to sue for part of the apartment, claiming that he had also invested money in it. But Melissa turned out to be a really good lawyer. When the court found out about the hidden loans and expenses for his mistress, David not only got nothing, but was also forced to pay me compensation. I sold that apartment. I couldn't live there anymore. Every corner reminded me of our life together, which turned out to be a lie. I bought a small, bright, modern one-bedroom apartment in another neighborhood. For the first time in many years, I furnished a home just for myself, choosing colors, furniture, and paintings that I liked, not us. I also had to change jobs, not because it was bad at the old company, but because I wanted to start over. I found a position as chief accountant at a medium-sized IT company. The salary was higher, my colleagues were younger and more energetic, and the work was more interesting. I immediately liked my new boss, Lindsay, a 38-year-old divorced woman with 2 children. "Roxa," she said on my first day, "I don't know what happened in your previous life, but I can see that you're ready for change." "That's good. Here we value people who aren't afraid to grow." I took Spanish classes. I had always dreamed of learning the language. I joined a gym. Not to please my husband as I had done before, but because I wanted to take care of myself. I started reading books that I had put off for years and watching movies that we didn't have time for. The hardest thing was learning to trust myself again. After living in an illusion for so long, I constantly doubted my judgments. Am I understanding the situation correctly? Am I deceiving myself again? Should I trust this person? Robert helped. After that party, we started seeing each other more often, not as a couple, but as 2 people going through similar things. He understood what it was like to feel like a fool who had been deceived for years. He understood the anger, the shame, the desire for revenge, and at the same time, the emptiness after revenge. "You know," he said once when we were sitting in the park with coffee, "at first I thought I wanted to punish them, my ex and my partner. I planned how I would destroy their business, tell everyone the truth, and make them regret it. And then I realized it takes too much energy that could be spent on something better. We tried to be together as a couple. It seemed logical. We liked each other, understood each other's problems, had a lot in common. We dated for several months, went to the movies, cooked dinner for each other, even slept together. But something wasn't working. "Roxa," he said one evening as we lay in his bed, "I think we're trying to build a relationship for the wrong reasons." "What do you mean?" "We're not together because we love each other, but because we're afraid of being alone. It's not right for either of us." He was right. We broke up as a couple but remained friends. Good friends, without resentment or hard feelings. About 8 months after the breakup, David tried to get back together. He called one evening. I recognized his number and thought long and hard about whether to pick up the phone. "Roxa," his voice sounded tired, "I need to talk to you." "About what?" "In person. Can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop near my old office. David looked bad. He had lost weight, aged, and had dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing the same suit he had worn a year ago, but now it looked cheap and unfashionable. "How are you?" he asked when we sat down at a table. "Fine," I replied briefly. "I heard you changed jobs." "Yes." He paused, twirling his coffee cup in his hands. "Roxa, I came to apologize." I looked at him and felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no satisfaction, just nothing. And to say that I realize you were the best thing I ever had. "David, let me finish." He raised his hand. "I was a fool. I risked the most precious thing for what? For adventure? For the feeling that I was still young? I don't know. What about Tina? He grimaced. Tina went back to her husband. They went to family therapy and decided to give it another try. And me. She hates me. She says I ruined her life. I understand. Roxa, he leaned toward me. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with her. I looked at him and thought, maybe he even believes what he's saying. Maybe he really thinks he loved me while he was calling me a fool and spending our money on his mistress. Can we try again? He asked. I know it will be difficult. I know I have to earn your trust again, but I'm willing to work at it. I finished my coffee and looked at him. No, I said. Why? Can't you forgive me? I can. I already have. Then. But I don't want to be with you, David. He fell silent. Not because you cheated on me, not because you lied, but because I'm no longer the person who can be happy with you. I can change. Maybe, but I've already changed, and I like who I've become. He sat silently, staring at the table. Are you seeing someone? He finally asked. No, and not because I'm waiting for you. We parted politely, like acquaintances who hadn't seen each other in a long time. He didn't try to convince me. I didn't explain my decision in detail. We just parted ways. Walking home, I thought, it's strange how little I felt. A year ago, this conversation would have broken my heart or made me mad. But now, nothing. He became a stranger from the past to me. In recent months, I have felt more confident. At work, I was entrusted with a big project, and I did brilliantly. Lindsay even hinted at a possible promotion. I went on vacation to Europe, alone, for the first time in my life. I visited Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. I didn't take pictures of myself in front of landmarks, but of things I liked. Street cafes, old doors, flowers on balconies. My mom stopped asking when I would find a new man. At first, she was worried. She thought I would shut myself off and stop trusting men altogether. But when she saw how much calmer and happier I had become, she calmed down. Roxa, she said during our last lunch together, you look better than you did during all your years of marriage to David. I feel better, I replied honestly. But you don't want to be alone forever, do you? I thought about her question. Mom, I don't mind finding love again. But not just any love, only the kind that won't make me lose myself again. Today is Saturday, and I'm sitting in a new coffee shop near my house reading a book. This place opened a month ago, and I like it here. It's cozy, not too noisy, and the coffee is good. At the next table sits a man of about 35, working on his laptop. He's been coming here for several weeks, usually on weekends. We've exchanged glances and smiles a few times. Today he comes over to my table. Excuse me, he says, but you're reading Marquez. My favorite book. I look at the cover. 100 Years of Solitude. I'm rereading it, I say. I first read it in college, but I didn't understand half of it then. And now? Now I understand that loneliness isn't always a bad thing. He smiles. Can I sit down? I'm Devin, by the way. Roxa. He sits down across from me and we talk about books. It turns out he's an engineer at a company that designs bridges. He recently moved to the city from another state. Why did you move? I ask. I got divorced, he says simply. I decided to start with a clean slate. I like that he's not trying to embellish or justify himself. How long ago? I ask. 6 months ago. How about you? A year ago. We look at each other and I see something familiar in his eyes, not pain, but the memory of pain. The understanding that trust is not something that comes naturally, but something that must be earned. To be honest, he says, I'm not looking for a serious relationship right now. I'm not ready yet, I guess. Me neither, I reply, and it's true. But it would be nice to talk to someone sometimes. About books, movies, life. It would be nice, I agree. We agree to meet next weekend, just to talk, without obligations or expectations. When he leaves, I stay in the cafe for another hour, finish reading the chapter, and think about how strange life is. A year ago, I was planning to take revenge on my husband for cheating on me. I thought revenge would bring me satisfaction and heal all my wounds, but instead, I just made room for a new life. Maybe Devin will be part of that life. Maybe not. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I can enjoy simple things again. Good coffee, a good book, an interesting conversation. What matters is that I'm no longer afraid to be alone, and therefore I can choose who to be with. I close the book and look out the window. It's spring outside. The sun is shining. People are going about their business and dreams. And I'm going too. Not away from something, but toward something. Toward a life that finally belongs only to me. This is not a fairy tale about a princess and a prince. This is a story about a woman who learned that the best love is the one that does not make you betray yourself. And the greatest happiness is when you like yourself enough not to settle for less than you deserve. Perhaps somewhere David is still telling new women how special they are to him. Perhaps Tina is trying to forget that year when she believed someone else's lies. Perhaps their stories are not over yet, and mine is just beginning.